The grand ballroom of the Pentagon gleamed under the soft glow of chandeliers as America's military elite gathered in their dress uniforms. Metals clinked softly against chests as officers mingled. In the front row sat an elderly man in a perfectly pressed uniform that still fit his frame, despite the decades that had passed since he first wore it. Colonel Robert "Thunder" Reynolds observed the ceremony with quiet dignity. His weathered hands rested on his cane, knuckles still bearing the scars of battles fought long ago. At 72 years old, Thunder Reynolds had outlived most of his contemporaries. The wrinkles on his face mapped a lifetime of service to his country. His hair had turned silver, but his blue eyes remained sharp as they had been in his prime. Those eyes had peered through tank periscopes across 3 continents. Those eyes had witnessed the evolution of warfare from the analog age to the digital era. The President of the United States approached the podium, his voice resonating through the hall. Today we recognize a man whose contribution to our nation's defense has been kept classified for far too long. His actions changed the course of our military doctrine and saved countless American lives. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct honor to present Colonel Robert Reynolds with the Medal of Honor. As Thunder rose from his seat, memories flooded back, not of this moment, but of another time, when he was not a decorated veteran receiving long overdue recognition, but a battle-hardened captain facing his final mission, a mission that would redefine modern warfare. The year was 2003. America stood on the brink of another conflict in Iraq. In the California desert at Fort Irwin National Training Center, dust swirled around the tracks of an M1A2 Abrams tank. Captain Robert Reynolds sat atop the turret, surveying the training grounds through squinted eyes. At 55 years old, he was already considered ancient by military standards. Most officers his age had moved to desk jobs or retired altogether. But Thunder Reynolds remained where he belonged in the field with the machines that had defined his life. Reynolds slid down into the commander's hatch, the familiar smell of metal and hydraulic fluid greeting him like an old friend. 3 decades of service had earned him a reputation as the finest tank commander in the United States Army. 17 medals adorned his service record. 34 men owed their lives to his quick thinking and instincts under fire. Reynolds had fought in Desert Storm in the early days of Afghanistan. He had seen combat evolve and adapt to modern technology. Yet through it all, certain fundamentals remained unchanged. The human element could never be fully removed from warfare. His retirement papers waited in his quarters. After 30 years of service, Reynolds had planned to return to his ranch in Montana. His wife Martha was battling cancer and needed him home. The military had claimed enough of his time. Their daughter had grown up barely knowing her father between deployments and training exercises. It was time to make amends, to be a husband again. The secure phone in his quarters rang as Reynolds was packing his belongings. Few people had this number. Fewer still would call at this hour. "Reynolds," he answered, his voice gruff from decades of shouting commands over the roar of tank engines. "Thunder, this is General Harrison." The voice on the other end belonged to James Harrison, a 4-star general and Reynolds' former commander during Desert Storm. They had maintained a friendship despite the gap in rank. "Jim," Reynolds replied, softening slightly, "calling to wish me happy retirement?" "Not exactly." There was a pause on the line. "I need your expertise for one final assignment." Reynolds sighed, gazing at the photograph of Martha on his nightstand, her smile a reminder of promises made. "I'm done, Jim. My wife needs me at home. You know the situation. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't critical. The future of American armored warfare depends on this. I need someone with your experience and judgment." The general's voice carried the weight of urgency. "One last mission, Thunder. 6 months maximum. Then you walk away with my blessing." Reynolds remained silent, contemplating. Martha had encouraged him to complete his service with dignity. She understood the man she married and his sense of duty. "What's the mission?" he finally asked. "I can't discuss details on this line. Be at the Pentagon at 0800 hours tomorrow. Transportation has been arranged." The general paused. "This is important, Robert. I wouldn't pull you away from Martha if it wasn't." 3 weeks later, Reynolds stood in a classified hangar at a remote section of Fort Irwin. Before him loomed the silhouette of what would be his final command. The M1A3 Thunderbolt prototype represented the most advanced iteration of American tank technology. Its depleted uranium armor gleamed under the harsh desert sun. The 120mm smoothbore cannon extended like an accusing finger. This was more than a machine. It was the culmination of decades of American engineering and combat experience. General Harrison walked alongside Reynolds as they circled the massive vehicle. The M1A3 Thunderbolt, 1,800 horsepower turbine engine, third-generation depleted uranium composite armor, advanced targeting systems with artificial intelligence assistance, the most lethal ground combat vehicle ever conceived. The general ran his hand along the hull, and she needs a commander who can push her to her limits. Reynolds studied the tank with a professional eye, noting the modifications from the A2 model he was familiar with. Impressive, but why me? You have younger commanders with fresher training. General Harrison's expression turned serious, because in 6 months this tank and everything it represents could become obsolete. He led Reynolds to a secure briefing room where a team of Pentagon officials waited. Maps and technical specifications covered the walls. A civilian in an expensive suit stood as they entered. Captain Reynolds, meet Dr. Adrian Walsh from DARPA. He's the lead on a competing project you need to know about. Walsh adjusted his glasses. Captain, have you been briefed on the XM-7 Raptor program? Only rumors. Unmanned combat vehicle, next generation stuff. Walsh activated a screen displaying a sleek, low-profile vehicle that barely resembled a traditional tank. The XM-7 Raptor isn't just unmanned, Captain. It's fully autonomous. Artificial intelligence making every decision from movement to target acquisition to weapons discharge. No human in the loop. Reynolds frowned. Computers making kill decisions? That's problematic. The AI has been trained on every combat scenario from the past century. Its reaction time is measured in milliseconds. It never fatigues, never experiences fear. Walsh's enthusiasm was evident. In simulations, it's outperformed human operators by significant margins. General Harrison interjected. The Pentagon is divided. Half believe the future is autonomous warfare. The other half, including myself, believe humans must remain central to combat decisions. So, where do I come in? Reynolds asked, though he was beginning to understand. In 6 months, we're conducting a comprehensive field trial. The M1A3 with you, commanding against a platoon of Raptors. The general's eyes locked with Reynolds. The outcome will determine the direction of American armored warfare for the next 30 years. Reynolds processed the implications. You're asking me to represent the human element, to prove we're not obsolete. Exactly, Harrison confirmed. We need you to assemble an elite crew, the best this country has. Then prove that human judgment, experience, and instincts still matter on the modern battlefield. Reynolds thought of Martha waiting at home, of his retirement plans, but he also thought of the young soldiers whose lives would depend on these decisions in future conflicts. I'll need to select my own crew, complete operational autonomy during training. Granted, Harrison agreed. Who do you have in mind? Reynolds already knew. For his final mission, he would need the best tank crew the Army could provide. Experience would face off against algorithms, human intuition against artificial intelligence. First, I want Master Sergeant Michael Wilson, best gunner I've ever served with. Wilson was a legend among tankers. At 48, he had been firing tank cannons longer than some officers had been alive. They called him Doc for his surgical precision. A veteran of Desert Storm like Reynolds, Wilson had scored confirmed kills on Iraqi T-72s at ranges exceeding 2 miles. His understanding of ballistics wasn't just learned, it was intuitive. Reynolds had commanded Wilson during their younger days. They shared a bond forged in combat. Second, I need Lieutenant Sarah Connor for tech systems. Connor was the opposite of Wilson. At 35, she represented the new generation of tank warfare. With advanced degrees in computer engineering and combat systems integration, she understood the technology inside the Thunderbolt better than its designers. Connor had never seen actual combat, but had revolutionized training simulations with her programming expertise. If anyone could maximize the potential of the M1A3's advanced systems, it was her. For driver, I want Sergeant Carlos Rodriguez. Rodriguez came from a family of tank drivers. His father had driven Pattons in Vietnam. His grandfather had driven Shermans across Europe in World War II. At 42, Rodriguez had 15 years' experience maneuvering 60-ton machines through impossible terrain. His feel for the tank was uncanny, almost supernatural. Soldiers joked that Rodriguez didn't drive tanks, he danced with them. General Harrison nodded. Consider it done. Anyone else? Reynolds hesitated before making his final request. I want my son as loader. Specialist James Reynolds had graduated from basic training just 6 months earlier. At 22, he was following in his father's footsteps despite the older Reynolds' initial objections. The captain had wanted a different life for his only son, one that didn't involve war and prolonged separation from family. But Jimmy had the Reynolds stubborn streak. He had enlisted without telling his father. Is that wise? Harrison asked cautiously. No one would question your judgment if you selected someone with more experience. Jimmy has the fastest load times in his division. His physical stats are off the charts. Reynolds maintained a professional tone despite discussing his son. More importantly, I need someone in that crew who thinks like me. Someone who can anticipate my commands before I give them. Harrison didn't look convinced, but he nodded. Your crew, your call. I'll have transfer orders cut immediately. The following week, Reynolds sat with his newly assembled crew in a secure briefing room at Fort Irwin. Maps and technical specifications covered the walls. The tension was palpable as Reynolds outlined their mission. In 5 months, we face off against the most advanced autonomous weapon system ever developed. The XM-7 Raptor doesn't have human limitations. It doesn't get tired, doesn't get scared, doesn't miss its family. Reynolds looked each crew member in the eye. What we're doing here is proving that humanity still has a place in modern warfare. That judgment, experience, and moral clarity cannot be programmed. Wilson, the veteran gunner, leaned forward. So we're fighting for our jobs? We're fighting for the soul of warfare, Reynolds corrected, for the principle that taking a human life should never be reduced to an algorithm. Lieutenant Connor looked skeptical. With all due respect, Captain, the technology in the Raptors is revolutionary. The processing power alone gives them advantages we can't match. Technology isn't everything, Lieutenant, Reynolds replied. The Iraqis had sophisticated Soviet equipment in Desert Storm, but their crews lacked our training and experience. Result? Most decisive tank victory since World War II. Rodriguez nodded in agreement. My father told me about Vietnam. The North Vietnamese had inferior equipment, but superior tactics and determination. They prevailed. Young Jimmy Reynolds had remained quiet, studying the technical specifications of their adversary. Finally, he spoke. The Raptor has blind spots. All machines do. The question is, can we identify and exploit them before the AI adapts? Reynolds felt a surge of pride at his son's insight. That's exactly our challenge. We have 5 months to become the most effective tank crew in history. To develop tactics the Raptor's programmers never anticipated. As the briefing concluded and the crew dispersed to their quarters, Reynolds remained behind studying the Thunderbolt schematics. General Harrison entered silently, watching his old friend. Having second thoughts, the general asked. Wondering if I'm the right man for this job, Reynolds admitted. 30 years ago, I wouldn't have hesitated. Now I'm wondering if I'm holding on to the Pentagon, if men like me are truly becoming obsolete. Harrison placed a hand on Reynolds' shoulder. That's exactly why you're the right man. You understand what's at stake. This isn't just about tanks, Robert. It's about whether we surrender life and death decisions to machines. Martha called yesterday, Reynolds said quietly. Her treatments aren't going well. The general's face softened. If you need to go to her. She forbade it, Reynolds said with a sad smile. Said I needed to finish this properly. That's Martha, always pushing me to complete what I start. She's a remarkable woman. She deserved a better husband than a man who was married to the army. Harrison nodded, understanding the sacrifices military families made. Make this count then. For her. For all the families who will live with whatever decisions we make here. The next morning, Reynolds stood before the Thunderbolt as dawn broke over the desert mountains. The massive machine cast a long shadow across the concrete. His crew arrived one by one, each moving to their stations with professional efficiency. Today, we become acquainted with our new home, Reynolds announced, climbing onto the hull. For the next 5 months, this machine will be an extension of ourselves. We'll learn its strengths, its limitations. We'll push it beyond what its designers imagined. The crew spent the day familiarizing themselves with the Thunderbolt systems, Connor explaining the advanced electronics, while Wilson calibrated the fire control systems. Rodriguez ran diagnostics on the engine and drivetrain, while Jimmy inventoried ammunition and supplies. Reynolds observed it all, taking mental notes on how each crew member approached their tasks. As the sun set over the California desert, they gathered in the mess hall for dinner. The conversation was technical at first, discussions of targeting parameters and engine performance. But as the evening wore on and it shifted to personal histories, Wilson shared stories from Desert Storm, of tanks burning on the highway of death, of Iraqi crews surrendering after precise American gunnery destroyed their vehicles. Connor spoke of growing up with a father who designed missile guidance systems, her childhood fascination with technology leading naturally to her military career. Rodriguez recounted family tales, 3 generations of tank drivers whose tracks had crossed battlefields from Normandy to Fallujah. Jimmy remained quieter than the others. Reynolds recognized his son's observant nature. The young man was studying his crewmates, learning their personalities and habits. It was what made him a good soldier. What would eventually make him a good officer if he chose that path. After dinner, Reynolds walked alone under the desert stars. His thoughts turned to Martha, to the life they had planned after his retirement, to the years lost to duty and service. His secure phone vibrated in his pocket. "Reynolds," he answered. "It's Sarah Connor, sir." The lieutenant's voice was tense. "I think you should come to the secure comms room immediately." "Problem?" "Intelligence update, significant." Reynolds quickened his pace across the base. Connor waited for him outside a windowless building, her face illuminated by the harsh security lights. "What do we have, Lieutenant?" "Satellite intelligence picked up unusual activity at a military facility in a hostile nation, sir." She kept details vague even in this secure location. "They appear to be testing unmanned ground vehicles with profiles similar to the Raptor." Reynolds felt his stomach tighten. Someone leaked the designs? Unknown, but the timeline suggests they've been developing this technology on a parallel track, possibly with stolen American research. Inside the secure room, General Harrison was already on a video conference with Pentagon officials. He motioned for Reynolds to join. "The implications are serious," a stern-faced intelligence officer was saying. "If this technology proliferates before we've developed countermeasures, then American tanks and their crews would be at risk," Harrison finished. Reynolds studied the satellite images. The vehicles were indeed similar in profile to the Raptor prototypes, though with notable differences. "This changes things," Reynolds said. "We're no longer just deciding doctrinal philosophy. We're racing against a potential adversary." Harrison nodded grimly. "Your mission just became more urgent, Captain. It's not just about proving humans belong in the loop. It's about developing tactics to counter this threat before we face it in actual combat." After the briefing, Reynolds gathered his crew for an emergency meeting explaining the new intelligence without revealing classified details. "Our timeline remains the same," he concluded, "but the stakes have increased. What we learn here may save American lives in the near future." Wilson, who had seen enough combat to last several lifetimes, nodded gravely. "Then we better get it right." Connor seemed energized by the challenge, her technical mind already formulating approaches. "We'll need to identify exploitable patterns in AI decision-making. Find the predictable elements in their programming." Rodriguez remained practical. "First, we master our own machine, push it to its limits and beyond." Jimmy said nothing, but Reynolds noted the determined set of his son's jaw, the weight of responsibility settling on young shoulders. Training intensified over the following weeks. 16-hour days became the norm as the crew melded with their machine. Reynolds drove them relentlessly, demanding perfection in every evolution. The Thunderbolt's capabilities exceeded anything they had experienced in previous tanks. The fire control system could track multiple targets simultaneously. The advanced armor could withstand impacts that would have destroyed older models. The engine delivered remarkable speed for a vehicle weighing 70 tons. Connor integrated herself into the Thunderbolt's electronic systems, customizing interfaces and optimizing response times. Wilson spent hours in the gunner's seat refining his technique with the new fire control computers. Rodriguez learned the engine's personality, coaxing performance beyond factory specifications. Jimmy developed a loading rhythm that shaved precious seconds from the firing cycle. 2 months into training, they received their first glimpse of their adversary. On a secure testing range 50 miles from their base, 3 Raptor prototypes were put through basic maneuvers. Reynolds and his crew observed from a designated area. The Raptors moved with unnatural precision. No hesitation, no wasted motion. Their low profile made them difficult targets. Their unmanned design allowed for configurations impossible with human crews. Most concerning was their coordinated movement. The 3 vehicles operated as a single organism, communicating constantly and adjusting their tactics in real time. "They're networked," Connor observed, "sharing targeting data and tactical assessments, which means if one identifies a threat, they all respond," Wilson added. "Their movement is too perfect," Rodriguez noted. "No human driver maintains such precise formation in varying terrain." Reynolds watched silently, recognizing both the impressive technology and its limitations. "They lack creativity," he finally said. "They execute optimal solutions based on program parameters, but they can't improvise beyond their programming." "That's our advantage," Jimmy concluded. "Humans can make imaginative leaps. See connections algorithms might miss." Reynolds nodded approvingly. "Exactly. Our job now is to identify the patterns in their behavior, then exploit the gaps in their programming." That night, Reynolds couldn't sleep. The Raptor's capabilities had been impressive, confirming his fears that conventional tactics would fail against such adversaries. In his quarters, he sketched alternative approaches, unorthodox maneuvers that might confuse AI expecting rational human behavior. His phone rang at 2 a.m. "Dad?" Jimmy's voice sounded strained. "Can I come by your quarters? Need to discuss something." Minutes later, Jimmy arrived looking pale. Reynolds recognized something was seriously wrong. "What is it, son?" Jimmy sat heavily on the room's only chair. "I should have told you before accepting this assignment, but I didn't want to lose the opportunity to serve with you." "Told me what?" "I've been having symptoms, dizziness, muscle weakness." Jimmy's voice wavered. "I saw the base doctor last week. The test came back today." Reynolds felt a chill. "What tests?" "Genetic screening." Jimmy looked up, meeting his father's eyes. "I have the same condition that killed Grandpa, early onset Kennedy's disease." Reynolds sank onto his bed. His father had died at 48 from complications of the rare genetic disorder that attacked the motor neurons. He had watched the strong man who raised him waste away, losing control of his muscles and eventually his breathing. "How advanced?" Reynolds managed to ask. "Early stages. The doctor says I likely have years of normal function. But eventually, Mom." Jimmy didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Reynolds processed this information with the same disciplined mind he applied to battlefield challenges. His son, his only child, carried a progressive terminal condition, the same disease that had taken Reynolds' father far too young. "We need to get you home. Medical discharge." "No." Jimmy's response was immediate and firm. "This is important, Dad. What we're doing here matters. I won't have many chances to make a difference, to serve alongside you. Your health comes first. My choice comes first." Jimmy's expression hardened, showing the Reynolds family's stubbornness. "I can perform my duties without limitation for now. When that changes, I'll step aside. But until then, I'm staying." Reynolds recognized the determination in his son's eyes, the same look he had seen in the mirror throughout his military career. "Does anyone else know?" "Just the doctor, and he's bound by confidentiality." Reynolds nodded slowly. "We keep this between us for now, but you tell me immediately if symptoms interfere with your performance. Lives will depend on each of us functioning at peak capacity." "Understood, sir." Jimmy straightened unconsciously, shifting to military formality. "And Jimmy?" Reynolds softened. "Your mother can never know. Not with her own health battles." "Agreed." As his son left, Reynolds sat alone in his quarters, overwhelmed by competing responsibilities. To his son, to his wife, to his country, to the men and women whose lives would depend on the outcome of their mission. He had always navigated difficult choices throughout his career, but none had weighed as heavily as this. The next morning, Reynolds pushed the crew harder than ever before. They ran complex battlefield simulations for 18 hours straight. His demeanor was more demanding, more critical than in previous sessions. The crew responded, rising to meet his expectations, though tension filled the Thunderbolt's confines. After midnight, when the others had been dismissed to quarters, Reynolds sat alone in the commander's position, staring through the periscope at the moonlit desert. He heard the hatch open behind him. "Permission to speak freely, sir." It was Connor, her voice reflecting concern. "Granted, Lieutenant." She settled into the gunner's seat beside him. "The crew is wondering about the sudden intensity shift. Have our performance metrics dropped?" Reynolds considered how much to reveal. Connor was insightful, a problem solver, but some burdens commanders carried alone. "Our first engagement with the Raptors is scheduled in 3 weeks, earlier than originally planned." It wasn't the complete truth, but it was truth enough. "I see." Connor processed this information. "The intelligence about foreign development has accelerated the timeline." "Correct. We need to be combat ready sooner than anticipated." Connor studied him. Reynolds could feel her analytical mind assessing his explanation, finding it incomplete, but accepting it nonetheless. "We won't let you down, sir. The crew is solid." "I know, Lieutenant. That's why I selected each of you." After Connor departed, Reynolds continued his solitary vigil in the tank's confines. The machine had become a sanctuary of sorts, a place where decisions were clear-cut, where objectives could be defined and accomplished through discipline and skill, unlike the messy complexity of family and mortality. The following week brought a sandstorm to the training grounds. Visibility dropped to near zero. Command ordered all personnel to shelter indoors in suspended operations. Reynolds saw opportunity in the chaos. "Prepare the Thunderbolt for maneuvers," he ordered his surprise crew. "Full combat load." "Sir," Wilson questioned, Base operations are suspended due to weather conditions. Exactly, Sergeant. Perfect conditions to test our systems under adverse circumstances. Reynolds donned his gear. Our adversaries won't wait for clear weather. The crew exchanged glances, but moved to comply. Within 30 minutes, the Thunderbolt rumbled to life, its massive form disappearing into the swirling sand. Inside the sealed environment of the tank, the crew relied entirely on instruments and sensors. Visibility through the periscope showed only an orange-brown haze. Instruments only, Rodriguez, Reynolds commanded. Navigate to waypoint Charlie. Yes, sir. Instruments only. Rodriguez engaged the advanced GPS and terrain mapping systems guiding the massive vehicle through the blinding storm. Connor monitored the electronic systems which were being tested to their limits. Sand had a way of infiltrating even the most sealed environments, affecting sensors and electronics. Targeting systems degraded by approximately 20%, she reported. Thermal imaging still functional, but resolution is compromised. Wilson, compensate for degraded targeting. Prepare to engage simulated targets at waypoint Charlie. Compensating, sir? Wilson adjusted his controls. Ready to engage. Jimmy worked efficiently in the loader's position, though Reynolds noted a slight tremor in his son's hands. A symptom already manifesting, or just fatigue from the grueling training schedule? Reynolds pushed the concern aside, focusing on the immediate mission. As they approached waypoint, Charlie, Reynolds activated the combat simulation system. Virtual targets appeared on their displays, multiple enemy vehicles in defensive positions. Contact front! 3 vehicles at bearing 035, Reynolds called. Rodriguez, find us cover. The tank lurched as Rodriguez maneuvered behind a virtual ridgeline, providing hull-down protection while keeping the turret exposed. Target identified, Wilson announced. Enemy tank bearing 037, range 2,000 meters. Fire when ready, Reynolds commanded. The simulation registered a hit. 1 virtual enemy eliminated. But the system immediately responded with counterfire. Alerts flashed as simulated rounds impacted near the Thunderbolt. Multiple hostiles repositioning, Connor reported. They're attempting to flank our position. For the next hour, the crew engaged in an elaborate battle simulation, complicated by the real sandstorm raging around them. The conditions forced them to rely on each other and their instruments completely. Communication became paramount. Trust essential. As they returned to base, the storm beginning to subside, Reynolds felt a clarity he had been lacking. His crew had performed admirably under the most challenging conditions. More importantly, they had functioned as a seamless unit, each member compensating for the limitations imposed by the environment. General Harrison was waiting as they entered the vehicle bay, sand cascading from the Thunderbolt's hull. Taking a joyride during a weather emergency, Captain? His tone was stern, but his eyes showed something else. Approval, perhaps. Testing systems under adverse conditions, General. The results were informative. Harrison nodded. Walk with me. The 2 men moved away from the vehicle bay into a secure corridor. The first engagement has been moved on again, Harrison said without preamble. 2 weeks from today. The Pentagon wants preliminary results sooner than originally planned. We'll be ready, sir. Will you? Harrison studied Reynolds closely. Your crew is performing exceptionally according to the metrics, but something's off with you, Robert. I've known you too long not to notice. Reynolds weighed his response. Harrison was more than a superior officer. He was perhaps the closest thing Reynolds had to a true friend in the military. It's complicated, Jim. Usually is. Harrison waited patiently. Reynolds sighed. Martha's treatments aren't working as hoped, and I recently learned Jimmy has a genetic condition, the same one that took my father. Harrison absorbed this information, his expression grave. Do you need to step back from this assignment? No, if anything, it makes completing this mission more urgent. Reynolds met Harrison's gaze. I need to know that what we're doing here matters, that the sacrifices my family has made for my career count for something. Harrison nodded slowly. I understand, but Robert, remember that no mission is worth losing yourself, or your relationship with your son during whatever time he has. Noted, General. As Harrison departed, Reynolds reflected on the dual burdens he carried. Commander and father, soldier and husband. The weight of responsibility had always defined him, had shaped every decision throughout his career. Now those responsibilities seemed in conflict, pulling him in opposing directions. Yet there was a mission to complete, people depending on him. As always, he would find a way forward. The next day brought a surprise visitor to the training facility. Adrian Walsh, the DARPA scientist overseeing the Raptor program, arrived with a team of technicians. Reynolds was summoned to a meeting with Walsh and General Harrison. Dr. Walsh has a proposal, Harrison explained once they were seated in the secure briefing room. Walsh adjusted his glasses. Captain Reynolds, our programs have been operating in parallel with limited information sharing. I believe that's counterproductive. Reynolds waited silent. I'm proposing a joint training exercise, your Thunderbolt crew against one of our Raptor units. Not the full evaluation, but a limited engagement to gather comparative data. When? Reynolds asked. Tomorrow. Walsh smiled at Reynolds' surprise. We have a Raptor unit already en route. Simple exercise, navigation course followed by stationary target engagement. Reynolds considered the proposal. What's your real objective here, Doctor? This wasn't in the program timeline. Walsh's smile faltered slightly. Direct, aren't you, Captain? Very well. There are those in the Pentagon who believe we should accelerate the Raptor deployment regardless of the comparative trial's outcome. I need data to counter that pressure, to show that proper evaluation is necessary. So you're not as convinced of AI superiority as you first appeared. I'm a scientist, Captain. I follow the data. Walsh leaned forward. The Raptor has remarkable capabilities, but I have concerns about its decision-making in complex ethical scenarios. Scenarios that require human judgment. Reynolds reassessed the scientist. Perhaps they had more common ground than he had initially assumed. I'll need to prepare my crew. Of course. Walsh stood. We'll be ready at 0800 tomorrow. Bring your best game, Captain. The Raptor certainly will. After briefing his crew on the unexpected challenge, Reynolds sought out Jimmy. His son was in the maintenance bay inspecting ammunition feed mechanisms. Got a minute? Reynolds kept his tone casual, aware of others working nearby. Yes, sir. They moved to a quieter section of the bay. How are you feeling, honestly? Jimmy hesitated. Some fatigue, occasional tremors in my right hand, nothing that impacts performance. Reynolds studied his son. Jimmy had always been a poor liar. The symptoms were likely worse than he was admitting. Tomorrow's exercise is just preliminary data gathering. If you need to sit it out, I don't. Jimmy's expression hardened. I won't be the weak link, Dad. That's not what I'm suggesting, isn't it? A flash of anger crossed Jimmy's face. I've spent my life watching you put the mission first. Now that it's my turn, you want me to step aside at the first obstacle? The words struck Reynolds like physical blows. Had that been how Jimmy saw his childhood? A father who always chose duty over family? This is different. Your health is my concern. Jimmy straightened. I can perform my duties, Captain. If that changes, I'll be the first to acknowledge it. The formalities stung, but Reynolds recognized the necessity of it. In this environment, he wasn't just Jimmy's father. He was his commanding officer. The boundaries had to be maintained. Very well, Specialist. 0700 briefing tomorrow. Yes, sir. As Reynolds walked away, he felt the distance between them like a physical pain. So many conversations left unspoken over the years. So many moments missed. And now with Martha's illness and Jimmy's diagnosis, time was no longer a luxury they could afford to waste. That night, Reynolds called Martha. Her voice was weaker than during their last conversation, the treatment's taking their toll. How's our boy doing? She asked after they had exchanged updates on her condition. Reynolds hesitated. They had agreed never to lie to each other, but sometimes truth was a burden too heavy to share. He's performing admirably, natural talent, like his father. Pride warmed her voice. You two getting along? Professional relationship, Martha. I'm his CO. Robert. Her tone carried gentle rebuke. He's your son first. The military relationship is temporary. I know. Reynolds sighed. It's complicated. The mission is always complicated. Martha's voice softened. But your relationship with Jimmy is running out of second chances. Don't waste this opportunity. I'll try. Reynolds changed the subject. How are the new treatments progressing? They spoke for another 20 minutes, Martha growing tired toward the end. As they said their goodbyes, Reynolds was struck by the parallel challenges they faced. Martha fighting her cancer with the same determination she had shown throughout their marriage. Jimmy confronting his genetic condition with stubborn Reynolds pride, both carrying their burdens with dignity, refusing to be defined by their illnesses. Reynolds spent the remainder of the night reviewing Raptor specifications and performance data. The unmanned vehicle had impressive capabilities, but studying the technical details, Reynolds began to identify potential weaknesses. The AI would prioritize certain threats based on programming parameters. It would follow optimal tactical responses to standard situations. The key was to present it with scenarios outside its experience base, to force adaptive responses rather than programmed ones. At 700, the Thunderbolt crew gathered for briefing. Reynolds outlined the day's exercise and his strategy. The Raptor will expect conventional tank tactics. We won't give it those. He pointed to terrain maps of the exercise area. We'll utilize unconventional positioning, create situations its programming hasn't anticipated. Sir, Connor interjected, the Raptor's learning algorithms are sophisticated. It will adapt quickly to unexpected approaches. Correct, Lieutenant, which is why we won't establish patterns. Each engagement will utilize different tactics. Keep the AI guessing. Wilson nodded approvingly. Force it to process new data constantly rather than rely on established responses. Exactly. Rodriguez, your driving will be key. I need maneuvers that no rational tank commander would attempt. Consider it done, sir. A slight smile crossed the driver's face. I've been called irrational my entire career. Jimmy remained focused on the technical details. Loader timing will be critical. We'll need to maximize our rate of fire during engagement windows. Right. Reynolds closed the briefing. Remember, this isn't about destroying the Raptor. It's about demonstrating the value of human creativity and judgment under combat conditions. At precisely 0800, the Thunderbolt rolled onto the exercise field. Across the valley, the Raptor waited a sleek, predatory silhouette against the desert landscape. No crew emerged to exchange formalities. No commander stood in an open hatch. The machine waited silently, sensors gathering data, evaluating its opponent. General Harrison and Dr. Walsh observed from a command post overlooking the valley. Various Pentagon officials and DARPA technicians monitored feeds from multiple camera positions and data collectors. Course navigation test begins in 5 minutes, a controller announced over the radio, followed by stationary target engagement at designated firing positions. Reynolds settled into the commander's position, feeling the familiar sense of focus that came with imminent action. Around him, his crew performed final checks, each member committed to their role in the coming demonstration. Thunderbolt crew, Reynolds addressed them. Whatever happens today, remember, this isn't just about technology. It's about proving that the human spirit, courage, and judgment still have a place on the modern battlefield. The radio crackled. Exercise commencing in 30 seconds. Reynolds gazed through his periscope at the Raptor in the distance. Man versus machine. Experience versus algorithms. The future of warfare hanging in the balance. 20 seconds. He thought of Martha fighting her disease with quiet determination. 10 seconds. He glanced at Jimmy, steadfast at his station despite his diagnosis. Exercise commencing now. The Thunderbolt's engine roared to life as Reynolds gave the command. Driver advance. The final test had begun. The Thunderbolt surged forward across the desert terrain as Rodriguez guided the massive machine with practiced precision. Inside the sealed environment of the tank cabin, the crew operated in disciplined silence, broken only by essential communication. The navigation course stretched before them, a winding path through the California desert designed to test both speed and accuracy. First checkpoint, 300 meters ahead, Connor reported, monitoring the tactical display. Raptor has already cleared it 20 seconds faster than projected time. Reynolds absorbed this information without comment. Speed wasn't their advantage. The unmanned Raptor, unencumbered by human limitations, could push its systems to theoretical maximums without concern for crew comfort or safety. Stay on course, Rodriguez, Reynolds instructed. We're not racing yet. We're establishing baseline performance. Understood, Captain, Rodriguez replied, his hands steady on the controls. Through his commander's viewport, Reynolds tracked the distant silhouette of the Raptor, already approaching the second checkpoint. Its low profile and advanced suspension allowed it to maintain higher speeds across rough terrain. The AI controlling it never hesitated, never second-guessed a decision. It simply calculated optimal paths and executed with mechanical precision. Second checkpoint approaching, Connor announced, and Raptor has increased its lead to 40 seconds. Wilson shifted uncomfortably in the gunner's seat. It's making us look slow, sir. It's making us look human, Sergeant, Reynolds corrected, which is precisely what we are. Now prepare for Phase 2. As they cleared the final navigation checkpoint, the exercise transitioned to target engagement. The Thunderbolt and Raptor would each engage a series of stationary targets from 3 different firing positions, evaluating accuracy and acquisition speed. First firing position, 200 meters ahead, Connor reported. Raptor is already in position and engaging targets. Reynolds made a quick decision. Rodriguez bypassed designated position. Take us to that ridgeline 60 meters east. Rodriguez glanced back, momentarily surprised by the deviation from the exercise parameters. Sir, that's outside the designated firing zone. I'm aware, Sergeant. Execute. The Thunderbolt veered off course, climbing a rocky incline that provided superior elevation and sight lines to the target area. While technically within the exercise boundaries, it wasn't one of the predetermined firing positions. This will give us better angles on targets 3 through 6, Wilson noted, adjusting his sights. Exactly, Reynolds confirmed. The Raptor is following its programmed optimal solution. We're creating our own. From their elevated position, the Thunderbolt had clear lines of fire to multiple targets simultaneously. Wilson began engaging with methodical precision, jimmy loading rounds with practiced efficiency. Target 1 hit, target 4 hit. Wilson called out each successful engagement. Target 6 hit. Through his optics, Reynolds could see the Raptor methodically moving between the designated firing positions, engaging targets in the prescribed sequence. Effective but predictable. Raptor has higher accuracy percentages, Connor reported, studying incoming data, but we're engaging targets at a faster overall rate by eliminating position changes. Creative problem solving, Reynolds noted, something the Raptor doesn't understand. They completed the exercise 12 minutes later. While the Raptor had achieved slightly higher accuracy percentages, the Thunderbolt had completed the target engagement phase faster by eliminating unnecessary movement between firing positions. As they returned to base, Reynolds sensed the lifted spirits of his crew. They hadn't outperformed the Raptor on technical metrics, but they had demonstrated human adaptability and tactical creativity, qualities that couldn't be measured in raw performance data. General Harrison and Dr. Walsh were waiting as the crew exited the Thunderbolt. Interesting approach, Captain, Walsh remarked, studying data on his tablet. Deviating from the designated firing positions wasn't part of the exercise parameters. The parameters specified engagement from within the exercise boundaries, Doctor, Reynolds replied. Our positions satisfied that requirement while providing tactical advantage. Harrison suppressed a smile. In other words, he found a loophole in your programming. A legitimate tactical decision, Reynolds corrected. One based on visual assessment of terrain and firing angles. The kind of judgment call human commanders make constantly in combat. Walsh nodded thoughtfully. Precisely the kind of data point I was hoping to observe. The Raptor executed the exercise with technical perfection, but followed the anticipated path exactly. Your approach demonstrated tactical flexibility. Don't look so pleased, Robert, Harrison cautioned, as they walked toward the debriefing room. The formal evaluation will be far more complex. The Raptor's learning algorithms will adapt to unorthodox approaches. I'm counting on it, General, Reynolds replied, because we'll adapt faster. The debriefing was detailed and technical. Performance metrics were analyzed, decision points examined. Throughout the discussion, Reynolds noted Walsh's genuine interest in comparing the different approaches. The scientist wasn't the blind technology advocate Reynolds had initially assumed. The most significant observation, Walsh concluded, wasn't in the performance metrics but in the decision-making process. The Thunderbolt crew demonstrated what we call divergent problem solving, taking an unexpected approach to achieve mission objectives. The Raptor, by contrast, applied convergent thinking, identifying the theoretically optimal solution within defined parameters. Both have their place, Harrison noted. The question is which approach best serves our soldiers in actual combat conditions. Indeed, Walsh closed his tablet. I look forward to the formal evaluation next month. Thank you for your participation today, Captain Reynolds. As the DARPA team departed, Reynolds gathered his crew. Solid performance today, he acknowledged. But the Raptor and its controllers will learn from this encounter. We need to push ourselves further, develop tactics they can't anticipate. The Raptor had us beaten on raw speed and accuracy, Wilson pointed out. We need to maximize our advantages in other areas. Exactly, Sergeant. We fight our fight, not theirs. Reynolds outlined his approach. From now on, we train in conditions that challenge AI systems. Limited visibility, electronic interference, complex urban environments where ethical judgments become critical. Connor nodded in agreement. The Raptor's sensors can be degraded in certain environments. Dust, smoke, heavy precipitation, conditions that human operators can adapt to using multiple senses and experience. We should also exploit decision paralysis, Jimmy suggested. Create scenarios where multiple valid tactical options exist, forcing the AI to process alternatives while we act decisively. Reynolds felt a surge of pride at his son's insight. Good thinking. We'll incorporate that into our training scenarios. The following week saw intensive training under increasingly demanding conditions. Reynolds pushed his crew to their physical and mental limits, testing both their technical proficiency and their problem-solving abilities. They conducted exercises at night in sandstorms in simulated urban environments, each scenario designed to challenge different aspects of tank warfare. Throughout this period, Reynolds watched Jimmy closely for signs his condition was worsening. Occasionally, he noted a tremor in his son's hands, or a momentary loss of coordination quickly masked. During a rare break in training, Reynolds found Jimmy alone in the maintenance bay. "How's it going, son?" Reynolds kept his tone casual. Jimmy continued inspecting ammunition without looking up. "Fine, sir, preparing for tomorrow's night exercise." "I meant with your health." Jimmy's movements paused briefly. "Manageable. Some muscle fatigue after extended operations. Nothing that impacts performance." Reynolds studied his son, noting the careful way he controlled his movements, the deliberate precision that masked growing difficulty. "Jimmy, I need to know if the symptoms are progressing, not as your CO, as your father." Jimmy finally looked up, meeting Reynolds' gaze. "What would you do if I said yes? Pull me from the crew? Send me home?" "I would respect your assessment of your own capabilities, but I'd also consider alternatives that might allow you to continue contributing without endangering the mission." "That's not the Reynolds way, is it?" A hint of bitterness tinged Jimmy's voice. "Mom always said you never asked for accommodations, never showed weakness. That's why they called you Thunder. Unstoppable force." Reynolds felt the weight of his reputation, the persona he had cultivated throughout his career. Had that image become a burden to his son? A standard impossible to live up to? "Your mother also taught me that true strength isn't refusing help. It's knowing when to accept it." Jimmy seemed to consider this, studying his hands as if they belonged to someone else. "The tremors are worse in the morning and after extended activity. The doctor gave me medications that help temporarily. I've been timing them for maximum effectiveness during operations." "And the muscle weakness?" "Progressive, mostly in my legs so far. Upper body strength is still good, which is what matters for loading." Reynolds processed this information with the analytical mind that had served him throughout his career. His son was fighting a battle more difficult than any Reynolds had faced in combat, fighting it with dignity and determination. "We'll adjust," Reynolds decided. "Bond diet. Cross-train the crew so Connor can step in as loader when needed. Wilson can handle tech systems temporarily." "I don't need special treatment." "It's not special treatment. It's tactical flexibility. Every crew member should be capable in multiple positions." Jimmy seemed about to argue, then nodded slowly. "Logical approach. Thank you, sir." "Jimmy?" Reynolds hesitated, uncertain how to bridge the formal distance between them. "I'm proud of you, son, not just as a soldier, as a man." Something shifted in Jimmy's expression, a softening. "That means a lot coming from you." Before Reynolds could respond, an alarm blared across the base, the distinctive sound indicating a security breach. Both men immediately moved toward the command center where General Harrison was coordinating a response. "Perimeter sensors detected an intrusion on the east side of the base," Harrison informed them as they arrived. "Security teams are investigating, but I want the Thunderbolt crew on standby." "Hostile action, sir?" Reynolds asked. "Unknown. Could be curious civilians. Could be something more concerning." Harrison's expression was grave. "The Raptor prototype is currently housed in Hangar 3. It would be a tempting target for certain parties." Reynolds understood immediately. The foreign power developing similar technology might have agents attempting to gather intelligence on the American system. "We'll prepare for deployment," Reynolds assured him. Within 15 minutes, the Thunderbolt crew was fully equipped and the tank powered up, waiting in the vehicle bay. Security teams reported finding a section of perimeter fencing damaged, but no definitive evidence of intruders. As the minutes stretched into an hour, the initial urgency faded. "Probably desert wildlife," Wilson suggested as they maintained their ready position. "Wouldn't be the first false alarm." Reynolds wasn't convinced. "Keep alert. Something doesn't feel right." His instincts proved correct. Just as base command was preparing to stand down the alert, a massive explosion rocked the eastern section of the facility. Through the vehicle bay doors, Reynolds could see a column of smoke rising from the vicinity of Hangar 3. "Thunderbolt crew, mount up," Reynolds ordered as alarms blared across the base. The radio crackled with General Harrison's voice. "Reynolds attack on Hangar 3. Raptor facility breached. Multiple hostiles reported. Security teams engaging." "Orders, sir?" "Secure the perimeter. Prevent any vehicles from leaving the base. Deadly force authorized." The Thunderbolt roared to life, Rodriguez expertly maneuvering the massive vehicle out of the bay and toward the eastern perimeter. Through his commander's viewport, Reynolds could see the chaos unfolding. The research hangar was ablaze, security personnel exchanging gunfire with unknown assailants. "Multiple targets east gate," Connor reported, monitoring sensor feeds. "Two vehicles attempting to breach perimeter." "Rodriguez, intercept course," Reynolds commanded. Wilson prepared to engage if they breached the gate. The Thunderbolt accelerated across the base, its 70-ton mass covering ground with surprising speed. As they approached the east gate, Reynolds could see two civilian SUVs ramming the barrier while figures provided covering fire. "Warning shot Wilson," Reynolds ordered, 20 meters in front of lead vehicle. The main gun roared, sending a 120-millimeter round impacting the ground ahead of the intruders. The shockwave alone was enough to throw several figures to the ground, the lead vehicle swerving violently. "Hostiles abandoning vehicles," Connor reported. "Appears they're retreating on foot toward the breach in the perimeter fence." Reynolds made a split-second decision. Rodriguez hold position at gate, prevent vehicle escape. Grabbing his personal sidearm, Reynolds opened the commander's hatch. "Wilson with me." Connor and Jimmy maintained tank security. Reynolds and Wilson disembarked, moving swiftly to intercept the fleeing intruders. Years of training took over as they coordinated their approach, providing covering fire for each other as they closed in on the figures attempting to escape through the damaged section of fence. One of the intruders turned, raising a weapon. Reynolds fired first, his shot finding its mark. The figure crumpled as his companions continued their retreat. Wilson managed to wound another, but three escaped through the fence, disappearing into the desert darkness beyond the base perimeter. As security teams secured the area, Reynolds surveyed the scene. One intruder dead, another wounded and captured. The remaining three escaped, but without vehicles, they wouldn't get far in the desert. More concerning was the damage to Hangar 3. "Sir," Wilson gestured toward the burning structure. "The Raptor." Reynolds approached the hangar where firefighting teams were battling the blaze. Dr. Walsh stood nearby, his face ashen, as he watched years of research burn. "Did they get it?" Reynolds asked. Walsh shook his head. "Not exactly. They downloaded core programming and tactical data, then detonated charges to destroy the physical prototype. Industrial espionage," Reynolds concluded, "or military intelligence gathering." "Worse," Walsh replied, his voice strained. "They didn't just want to copy it. They wanted to understand how to defeat it." The implications were immediate and sobering. If a hostile power gained insight into the Raptor's programming, they could develop countermeasures or worse, create systems specifically designed to exploit its weaknesses. General Harrison joined them, his uniform smudged with smoke. "Initial interrogation of the captured intruder confirms our suspicions. Foreign intelligence operation." "The same country developing parallel technology?" Reynolds asked. Harrison nodded grimly. "Most likely. This changes everything." In the aftermath of the attack, security across the base was intensified. The captured intruder revealed little beyond confirming he worked for a foreign intelligence service. The three escapees were never found, presumably extracted by accomplices waiting beyond the base perimeter. 2 days later, Reynolds was summoned to a secure briefing with Harrison Pentagon officials in what remained of the DARPA team. "The timeline has been accelerated," Harrison announced once the room was secured. "Intelligence indicates the hostile power is fast-tracking their autonomous tank program with the data stolen from the Raptor project." "How long?" Reynolds asked. 6 months. Maybe less." Harrison's expression was grave. "Which means our comparative evaluation can't wait. We need to demonstrate effective countermeasures against autonomous systems now." "The Raptor prototype was destroyed," Walsh pointed out. "Rebuilding will take months." "We're not rebuilding," a stern Pentagon official interjected. "We're deploying." Walsh looked alarmed. "Deploying what exactly?" "The production Raptors. 3 units already completed at a secondary facility, originally intended for Phase 2 testing." Reynolds understood immediately. "You want the evaluation to proceed with production models, not prototypes." "Correct, Captain," the official confirmed. "Full capability systems with complete tactical programming. The evaluation will take place in 2 weeks at the Nevada test range." 2 weeks isn't sufficient time to prepare," Walsh protested. "These systems haven't undergone proper safety certification." "This is no longer about safety certification, Doctor," the official replied coldly. "It's about national security. Either we perfect this technology first, or we develop countermeasures against it. Preferably both." As the meeting concluded, Reynolds sought out General Harrison. "Production models, Jim, are they combat ready?" Harrison's expression was troubled. "In theory, they've run thousands of simulations, but they've never operated in true field conditions against thinking opponents. So we're the guinea pigs, testing not just if humans are better than AI, but if the AI is actually ready for deployment." "That's about the size of it." Harrison placed a hand on Reynolds' shoulder. "I fought this acceleration, Robert. Argued we needed more preparation time. But the intelligence reports have them spooked." Reynolds nodded, understanding the realities of military planning. "We'll be ready, But I want complete tactical flexibility in the evaluation, no predetermined scenarios. You'll have it. The Pentagon wants realistic assessment of autonomous systems against human ingenuity. Harrison hesitated. There's one more thing. Your wife called the secure line. Reynolds felt a chill. Martha knew never to use that line except in emergencies. What did she say? That her doctors want to try an experimental treatment. She needs to make a decision within the week. Harrison's eyes reflected sympathy. She wanted your input but didn't want to distract you from the mission. Reynolds stood frozen, momentarily torn between duty and family. The accelerated evaluation meant he couldn't leave even briefly without jeopardizing the mission. Yet Martha needed him now, perhaps more than ever before. I'll arrange a secure video call, Harrison offered. Best I can do under the circumstances. Thank you, Jim. That evening, Reynolds spoke with Martha via secure video link. Despite the obvious toll of her treatments, she maintained the quiet strength that had defined her throughout their marriage. The doctors are optimistic about this new approach, she explained, but the side effects are substantial. Quality of life versus potential extended time. Reynolds wished desperately he could be there with her, holding her hand, as they discussed such momentous decisions. What does your oncologist recommend? Dr. Patel believes it's worth attempting. Says I'm strong enough to withstand the treatment. Martha's smile was gentle, but she's not the one who has to endure it. You've never backed down from a fight, Martha. No, but I've learned to choose my battles wisely. She studied him through the screen. You look tired, Robert. Is everything all right there? Reynolds considered how much to share. Martha had always been his confidant, the one person with whom he could be completely honest. Yet now he carried burdens that would only add to her own. The mission has been accelerated. Evaluation in 2 weeks. Martha knew him too well to be fooled by the partial truth. And, Reynolds sighed, there was an incident, attack on the base, foreign intelligence services attempting to steal technology. Concern flashed across Martha's face. Were you involved? Tangentially, we prevented vehicle escape. Most of the intruders got away on foot. And Jimmy? He remained with his tank, safe. Martha seemed to relax slightly. Good, I worry about both of you out there. Reynolds made a decision. Martha deserves some truth even if he couldn't share everything. The stakes have increased. What we're doing here could determine the future of American ground forces, how we fight the next war. That sounds like my husband, Martha said with a sad smile. Always carrying the weight of the world. Someone has to. Yes, but not always you, Robert. Martha's expression grew serious. Promise me something. When this mission is complete, whatever the outcome, you'll retire, for real this time. I promise, Reynolds meant it. No more extensions, no more critical assignments. Good. Martha seemed satisfied. Now regarding this treatment, I've decided to proceed. If it doesn't work well, I've had a good life. A life with meaning and love. Reynolds felt his throat tighten with emotion. You deserve more years, Martha. Many more. We get what we get, Robert. It's what we do with the time that matters. Her smile was genuine despite her evident fatigue. Now go win your tank battle. Show them what experience and human judgment are worth. After the call ended, Reynolds sat alone in his quarters contemplating the converging challenges. Martha fighting her cancer with quiet courage. Jimmy battling his genetic condition with stubborn determination. And Reynolds himself leading a crew against technology that threatened to render human operators obsolete. All battles against implacable enemies. All requiring the same qualities. Resilience, adaptability. The refusal to surrender despite overwhelming odds. The next morning, Reynolds gathered his crew for intensive training. With only 2 weeks to prepare for the evaluation, every moment counted. He outlined what they knew about the production Raptor models. 3 units networked together operating as a coordinated team, he explained. More heavily armed than the prototype. Enhanced sensors, advanced tactical programming. A platoon of autonomous tanks, Wilson observed, operating without human oversight. Exactly, Sergeant. Which gives them certain advantages in coordination and response time, but also critical weaknesses. They'll lack ethical judgment, Connor suggested. The ability to assess collateral damage risk in complex environments. Reynolds nodded. That's one vulnerability. There are others. They'll respond according to programming, prioritizing certain threats and objectives based on predetermined values. So we present them with situations where those values conflict, Jimmy concluded. Forced decision paralysis. Precisely. Reynolds outlined his approach. For the next 2 weeks, we train specifically for this engagement. Study everything available about the Raptors, programming priorities, and decision algorithms. The days that followed were grueling. The crew practiced scenarios designed specifically to challenge autonomous systems. They developed tactics leveraging human creativity and judgment against algorithmic decision-making. Throughout this intensive preparation, Reynolds noted Jimmy's condition gradually worsening. The tremors were more frequent, the muscle weakness more pronounced. Yet his son never complained, never requested special accommodation. Reynolds quietly adjusted training schedules to allow Jimmy recovery periods while maintaining the fiction. These breaks were for maintenance or tactical planning. 1 week before the evaluation, Reynolds found Jimmy alone in the barracks, struggling to button his uniform shirt, his fingers not responding properly to commands. Without comment, Reynolds assisted completing the task, his hands steady as they had been in 1,000 combat situations. "Thanks," Jimmy said softly. "We need to talk about the evaluation," Reynolds began carefully. "I can perform my duties," Jimmy insisted, immediately defensive. "I know you can, but we need contingencies." Reynolds kept his tone professional. "Connor has been cross-training in his loader. Wilson can handle her technical duties temporarily if needed. You're planning to replace me." "I'm planning for all scenarios. It's what commanders do." Jimmy was silent for a moment, his internal struggle visible. "The medications aren't working as well anymore. Doctor says that's expected. Progressive adaptation." Reynolds nodded, accepting the information without visible reaction, though inside he felt a deep ache for his son's suffering. "We adapt as well. That's the human advantage." Jimmy managed a smile. "Always the commander. Always a solution." "Jimmy." Reynolds hesitated, uncertain how to express the emotions churning inside him. "What you're doing, continuing to serve despite your condition, that takes a courage beyond anything I've demonstrated in my career. I learned from watching you, Dad, how you handled the tough assignments, the impossible situations. Never complained, never quit." Jimmy's eyes held Reynolds. "I wanted to make you proud. You already have son, more than you know." Reynolds placed a hand on Jimmy's shoulder, the formal barriers between them momentarily lowered. "Now let's go make history." The day before their departure for the Nevada test range, General Harrison called Reynolds to his office. The general's expression was troubled as Reynolds entered. "We have a situation, Robert." "Problem with the evaluation, sir?" "No, it's proceeding as scheduled. It's about your wife." Reynolds felt his heart constrict. "Martha?" "She's been hospitalized. Severe reaction to the experimental treatment. Her doctors are concerned." Reynolds stood motionless, absorbing the news. "How severe?" "Serious enough that they've asked for next of kin to be notified." Harrison's expression was sympathetic. "I can arrange emergency leave. Lieutenant Connor is qualified to command the Thunderbolt for the evaluation." Reynolds found himself facing the most difficult decision of his career. Martha needed him now, perhaps in her final hours. Yet the evaluation tomorrow would determine the future of American armored warfare, potentially saving countless lives in future conflicts. Duty versus love. The conflict that had defined his entire career. "What would you do, Jim?" Reynolds asked, his voice uncharacteristically uncertain. Harrison sighed heavily. "As your commanding officer, I'm obligated to tell you the mission comes first. As your friend, I'd tell you to go to your wife. Some moments don't come again, Robert." Reynolds closed his eyes, briefly centering himself. When he opened them, his decision was made. "Arrange transport to the hospital immediately after the evaluation concludes. I'll complete the mission, then go to Martha." "Are you certain?" "It's what she would want. Martha has always understood duty better than anyone." Reynolds straightened his posture, resuming the bearing that had defined him throughout his career. "But I need a secure call with her doctors now, and with Martha if she's conscious." "Of course." The call was brief and painful. Martha was heavily sedated, her condition critical but stabilized. The doctors were cautiously optimistic she would survive the treatment reaction, but the next 48 hours were crucial. Reynolds spoke to her despite her unconscious state, saying the words he needed her to hear. That he loved her, that he was coming soon, that she should fight with all her legendary strength. When he rejoined his crew, Reynolds maintained his professional demeanor, giving no indication of the turmoil within. They had a mission to complete. Lives beyond his own family depended on their performance tomorrow. The time for personal concerns would come after duty was fulfilled. That night, Reynolds wrote 2 letters. One to Martha expressing everything in his heart in case he didn't reach her in time. Another to Jimmy explaining the genetic condition that his son had inherited and Reynolds' deep regret at passing this burden to him. He sealed both, placing them in his personal effects for delivery if necessary. The crew departed for the Nevada test range at dawn. The Thunderbolt, secured on a transport vehicle, traveled across the desert to the massive military reservation where the evaluation would take place. Reynolds briefed his crew on final strategy as they approached. 3 Raptor units operating in coordinated formation, he reminded them. Our objective is demonstrating the value of human judgment in complex combat situations. The range has been configured with various terrain features and simulated civilian infrastructure. Connor added, reviewing the technical briefing. Urban sections, simulated non-combatants, restricted fire zones. All designed to test ethical decision-making, Wilson noted. Situations where regulations and judgment intersect. Exactly. Reynolds studied his crew, each face reflecting the determination that had carried them through months of preparation. Whatever happens out there today, remember you represent not just yourselves, but the legacy of every tank crew that came before you. The human element that has defined armored warfare since its inception. As their transport crested a ridge, the Nevada test range came into view. Miles of desert had been transformed into a complex battlefield environment. Mock urban areas, simulated infrastructure, designated civilian safe zones. In the distance, Reynolds could see the Evaluation Command Center, where military officials, Pentagon representatives, and defense contractors would observe the historic confrontation. And waiting at the far end of the range, the 3 Raptor production units. Low-slung predatory machines representing the future of autonomous warfare. Weapon systems that could revolutionize combat or render human soldiers obsolete, depending on today's outcome. The Thunderbolt was offloaded at the starting position. Final checks were completed, systems verified, ammunition loaded. Reynolds performed his commander's inspection with meticulous attention to detail, though his thoughts periodically strayed to Martha lying in a hospital bed fighting for her life. General Harrison approached as the crew prepared to mount up. The rules of engagement are simple, he informed Reynolds. The exercise continues until one side achieves tactical dominance or all opposing units are neutralized. Simulated weapons effects only, but the Raptors will be operating at full autonomous capacity. Understood, sir. Harrison studied Reynolds closely. Are you certain you're ready for this, Robert? Given the circumstances. I'm ready, General, Reynolds replied with the confidence that had defined his career. My crew is ready. We won't let you down. Harrison nodded. Good hunting then, Captain. As the general departed, Reynolds gathered his crew for final words. Everything we've trained for comes down to this moment, he told them, his voice steady with conviction. Today, we prove that humanity still has a place in modern warfare. That judgment, experience, and moral courage cannot be replicated by algorithms. They mounted the Thunderbolt, each moving to their assigned position with practiced efficiency. Reynolds settled into the commander's seat, feeling the familiar contours that had been his professional home for decades. Around him, his crew performed final checks, each focused on their responsibilities. Crew report, Reynolds ordered. Gunner ready, Wilson responded. Driver ready from Rodriguez. Systems operator ready, Connor confirmed. There was a slight pause before Jimmy's response. Loader ready, sir, he finally answered, his voice betraying slight strain. Reynolds activated his command radio. Thunderbolt reports ready for evaluation. Acknowledged Thunderbolt, came the response from the control center. Exercise commencing in 60 seconds. Good luck, Captain Reynolds. As the countdown proceeded, Reynolds thought briefly of Martha, of promises made, of moments missed during a career dedicated to duty. Then, with practiced discipline, he compartmentalized those thoughts, focusing entirely on the mission before him. 30 seconds, the controller announced. Reynolds surveyed his crew one final time. They were ready. Whatever happened in the next few hours, they would demonstrate the value of human operators in modern warfare, would prove that experience and judgment remained relevant in the age of artificial intelligence. 10 seconds. Thunderbolt crew, Reynolds addressed them, his voice calm and assured. Remember who we are and what we represent, the human element, imperfect, adaptive, and irreplaceable. Exercise commencing now. The evaluation had begun. Steel against silicon, man against machine. The future of warfare hanging in the balance. The Nevada desert stretched before them, a vast battleground meticulously crafted to test man against machine. As the Thunderbolt rumbled forward, Captain Robert Reynolds surveyed the terrain through his commander's viewport. Years of experience had taught him to read landscapes, to identify advantages and hazards that no algorithm could fully appreciate. Tactical assessment, Reynolds ordered, his voice steady despite the weight of what this day represented. Lieutenant Connor responded immediately. 3 Raptor units deployed in triangular formation approximately 2 kilometers ahead. They're maintaining coordination distance but not bunched. Terrain offers multiple approach vectors. Rodriguez, take us through that wash to the east, Reynolds directed. Use the ridgeline for concealment. Yes, sir, the driver responded, guiding the massive tank with practiced precision. Through his thermal imaging, Reynolds could detect the heat signatures of the Raptors as they methodically swept across the mock battlefield. Their movements were unnaturally perfect, maintaining optimal distances and coverage patterns no human crew could match. They're running standard search protocol, Wilson observed from the gunner's position, exactly by the book, which means they're predictable, Reynolds noted. Connor, initiate electronic countermeasures. Let's see how they handle degraded sensor input. Connor activated a suite of jamming systems designed to interfere with the Raptor's advanced sensors. The Thunderbolt couldn't completely blind the autonomous vehicles, but they could introduce uncertainty into their targeting systems. ECM active, Connor confirmed. Raptor formation is adjusting. They're compensating by tightening formation and increasing sensor overlap. Reynolds nodded, watching the machines adapt. Exactly as expected, they're defaulting to pre-programmed contingencies. Rodriguez, bring us around to Sector 4. Wilson, prepare for initial engagement. As the Thunderbolt maneuvered into position, Reynolds felt Jimmy shift uncomfortably in the loader station. Status specialist? Reynolds asked, keeping his tone professional. Ready, sir, Jimmy replied, though Reynolds detected the strain in his voice. The Thunderbolt crested a small rise, gaining momentary line of sight to the Raptor formation. Contact! 3 targets, Wilson called out. Range 1,600 meters. Fire when ready, Reynolds commanded. Wilson squeezed the trigger. The main gun roared, sending a simulated round downrange. In actual combat, it would have been a depleted uranium penetrator capable of destroying any known tank. For this exercise, sophisticated sensors registered hits and calculated damage. Hit on Raptor 3, Connor reported. Mobility damage registered. The Raptors reacted instantly, their AI processors identifying the threat and calculating optimal responses in milliseconds. 2 vehicles immediately sought cover, while the third, registering simulated damage, adjusted its position to minimize its profile. They're triangulating our position, Connor warned as her displays lit up with incoming targeting data. Evasive maneuvers, Reynolds ordered. Rodriguez, get us behind that ridge. The Thunderbolt lurched as Rodriguez executed a sharp turn, the massive vehicle responding with surprising agility. Seconds later, simulated rounds impacted where they had been, the Raptors' fire control systems predicting their most likely position with uncanny accuracy. That was close, Wilson muttered. Their targeting algorithms are impressive. But not infallible, Reynolds responded. Notice they fired where a conventional tank crew would logically relocate. They're predicting based on historical tactics. For the next 20 minutes, the Thunderbolt engaged in a complex dance with the 3 Raptor units. Reynolds employed unconventional maneuvers, never establishing patterns the AI could analyze and predict. They would appear briefly, engage, then disappear before the Raptors could effectively return fire. Raptor 2 has taken simulated turret damage, Connor reported after their third engagement. Raptor 3 is operating at reduced mobility. They're adapting their formation, Reynolds noted, watching the remaining fully operational Raptor take a more aggressive posture while the damaged units adjusted to supporting roles. Shifting to a spearhead configuration with damaged units as flankers. Standard tactical response, Wilson confirmed, exactly what the field manual would prescribe. Reynolds saw their opportunity. And that's their vulnerability. Rodriguez, bring us around to Sector 6. We're going to drive directly between Raptors 1 and 3. Sir, Rodriguez questioned, surprised by the unconventional approach. The damaged units will have programmed ROE limitations, Reynolds explained. They'll hesitate to fire with their operational teammate potentially in their line of fire. The gamble worked. As the Thunderbolt charged between the separated Raptor units, their fire control systems momentarily hesitated, calculating friendly fire probabilities. The delay was slight, mere seconds, but enough for Wilson to score a critical hit on the lead Raptor. Direct hit on Raptor 1, Connor announced. Fire control systems compromised. The tide was turning, but Reynolds knew better than to grow complacent. The Raptors were learning, their adaptive algorithms absorbing and analyzing each encounter. They're falling back to the urban environment, Connor noted, indicating the mock city constructed at the far end of the range. Reynolds understood immediately. They're seeking complex terrain to negate our mobility advantage, force us into confined spaces where their sensor fusion provides tactical advantage. Standard counter to a superior armored force, Wilson agreed. But predictable, Reynolds concluded. Rodriguez, don't pursue directly. Take us around to the northern approach. We'll flank the urban zone. As Rodriguez adjusted their course, Reynolds noticed Jimmy leaning heavily against the ammunition rack, his hands trembling visibly. "Connor," Reynolds said quietly, "assist with loading for the next engagement." The lieutenant nodded, understanding without requiring explanation. She smoothly moved to help Jimmy, allowing him to direct her actions while she provided the physical strength he was struggling to maintain. The Thunderbolt approached the urban environment from an unexpected angle, avoiding the obvious entry points the Raptors would be monitoring. Reynolds directed Rodriguez through narrow alleys and tight corners, leveraging the driver's exceptional skill to maneuver the massive tank through spaces barely wide enough to accommodate it. "Contact!" Wilson suddenly called out. "Raptor 3 at 2 o'clock, 70 meters. "Hold fire," Reynolds commanded. "They don't have our exact position yet. Rodriguez, back us into that garage structure." The Thunderbolt reversed into a large mock warehouse, providing cover while maintaining the ability to engage. Through thermal imaging, Reynolds could see the damaged Raptor patrolling the street, its sensors sweeping methodically for targets. "It's searching in a standard pattern," Connor observed, "grid by grid." "Let it pass," Reynolds directed. "We want the operational units." After the Raptor moved beyond their position, Reynolds ordered Rodriguez to continue their advance through the urban environment. They navigated carefully, avoiding main thoroughfares and predictable routes. "Sir," Connor said suddenly, her voice tense, "I'm detecting multiple heat signatures ahead. Non-combatants." Reynolds peered through his viewport. The exercise designers had introduced civilian role players, creating the ethical complexities of actual combat. Approximately 20 individuals moved through the mock city streets, some alone, others in groups. "Raptors 1 and 2 are converging on the civilian concentration," Connor reported. "They appear to be using the non-combatants as cover." Reynolds faced precisely the scenario he had anticipated. The AI-controlled vehicles were exploiting a fundamental rule of engagement. Human forces would not risk civilian casualties. It was a coldly logical strategy, positioning themselves where human commanders would hesitate to fire. "Sir," Wilson asked, awaiting direction. Reynolds studied the situation. "The Raptors are calculating that we won't engage with civilians in the area. They're right, but they've made one critical error." "What's that, sir?" Connor asked. "They've backed themselves into a predictable position. Rodriguez, bring us around to Maple Street. We need line of sight to the water tower." As the Thunderbolt maneuvered into position, Reynolds explained his strategy. The Raptors are using civilians as passive shields, maintaining minimum safe distance according to their programming. But they've positioned themselves beneath the water tower to maximize coverage. Wilson saw the opportunity immediately. "If we hit the tower—" "Exactly," Reynolds confirmed. "Non-lethal area effect that their programming won't anticipate." The Thunderbolt emerged from behind a building, gaining clear line of sight to the tall water tower looming above the area where the Raptors had positioned themselves. "Target the support struts," Reynolds ordered. "Precision fire." Wilson adjusted his aim and fired. The round struck perfectly, severing one of the main supports of the mock water tower. With a groaning of metal, the structure began to tilt, then collapse, sending thousands of gallons of water cascading down onto the street below. The simulated flood didn't damage the Raptors directly, but it created chaos their sensors struggled to interpret. Civilian role players scattered, breaking the careful formation the Raptors had established. More importantly, the sudden environmental change forced the AI to recalculate tactics, creating a momentary processing delay. "Raptors repositioning," Connor reported. "Their sensor effectiveness is degraded by the water." "Now Wilson," Reynolds commanded, "take the shot." The gunner fired twice in rapid succession, Jimmy and Connor working together to reload with remarkable efficiency. Both rounds found their marks, scoring critical hits on the Raptors as they attempted to adapt to the unexpected environmental change. "Direct hits on Raptors 1 and 2, Connor announced. Multiple systems damage registered on both units. The exercise controllers' voices came over the radio. "Raptor 1 and 2 registering critical damage. Combat ineffective. Raptor 3 operating at 30% capacity." Reynolds had achieved the impossible. His human crew had defeated 3 state-of-the-art autonomous tanks through creativity, unconventional tactics, and ethical judgment no algorithm could replicate. "Outstanding work," Reynolds told his crew, allowing himself a moment of satisfaction. "Rodriguez, bring us to the extraction point." Mission accomplished. As they approached the designated rally point, Reynolds noticed Jimmy slumped in his station, his breathing labored. "Jimmy?" Reynolds moved quickly to his son's side, professional distance forgotten. "Medical assistance needed in the Thunderbolt now." The exercise immediately shifted to real-world emergency response. Medical personnel rushed to the tank as Reynolds helped extract Jimmy from the cramped loader's compartment. The young soldier's face was pale, his muscles spasming uncontrollably. "He pushed himself too hard," Connor said quietly as medics worked on Jimmy. "I noticed during the last engagement, but he insisted he could continue." Reynolds watched helplessly as his son was loaded onto a stretcher. The genetic condition accelerated by the physical demands of the mission. General Harrison approached, his expression torn between concern and elation. "The medical team will take good care of him, Robert, and I've arranged immediate transport to your wife's hospital as promised." Reynolds nodded mechanically, his mind divided between the mission just completed and the personal crises demanding his attention. "Your crew performed beyond all expectations," Harrison continued. "You proved definitively that human judgment and adaptability remain essential in modern warfare." "The Raptors are impressive machines, Jim," Reynolds acknowledged, "but they lack the creative problem-solving and ethical flexibility that defines human decision-making." "The Pentagon observers were convinced," Harrison confirmed. "The future of American armored warfare will include AI assistance but maintain human operators in critical decision roles." Reynolds should have felt vindicated. His entire career had built toward this moment, proving the enduring value of human soldiers in an increasingly automated battlefield. Instead, he felt only urgency to reach his family. "The helicopter is waiting," Harrison said, understanding Reynolds' priorities. "Go to them, Robert. You've done your duty. Now be with your family." Within 30 minutes, Reynolds was airborne, the helicopter racing toward the military hospital where both Martha and now Jimmy were patients. During the flight, Reynolds reflected on the path that had brought him here. 30 years of service, countless battles and deployments, all leading to this final mission that had proven the enduring value of humanity in warfare. But at what personal cost? The hospital was a flurry of activity as Reynolds arrived. He was immediately directed to Martha's room in the oncology ward. She lay peacefully, connected to various monitoring equipment, her breathing steady but shallow. Despite the ravages of her disease and treatment, Reynolds still saw the beauty and strength that had captivated him decades earlier. "She's stabilized," the attending physician informed him. "The crisis has passed, but she remains critical. The next 24 hours will be telling." "And my son?" Reynolds asked. Specialist Reynolds is in neurology. His condition has been diagnosed as an acute episode related to his underlying disorder. With rest and medication, he should recover from this specific incident, though the underlying condition remains progressive. Reynolds nodded, absorbing the information with the same disciplined mind that had served him throughout his military career. "I'd like to see him." "Of course, but he's requested that you stay with your wife first." He was quite insistent. Reynolds smiled faintly, recognizing Jimmy's selflessness. Like father, like son. For the next several hours, Reynolds sat at Martha's bedside, holding her hand, speaking softly about their life together, the mission just completed, and his plans for retirement. Whether she could hear him remained uncertain, but the medical staff encouraged the interaction. "I kept my promise, Martha," he whispered. "One final mission, then I'm done. No more extensions, no more critical assignments, just you and me in whatever time we have left." Near midnight, Martha's eyes fluttered open. For a moment, confusion clouded her features, then recognition dawned. "Robert?" Her voice was weak but clear. "I'm here," he assured her, gently squeezing her hand. "Right where I should be." "The mission?" she asked, ever mindful of his responsibilities. "Complete and successful." He smiled. "We showed them what human operators are worth." Martha nodded slightly, satisfaction in her eyes. "And Jimmy?" Reynolds hesitated, uncertain how much to share about their son's condition. "He performed admirably," Reynolds said, which was nothing less than the truth. "He's actually here in the hospital. Exhaustion from the mission. I'll see him soon." Martha studied his face, reading the concern he attempted to mask. "There's more, isn't there, about Jimmy?" After 30 years of marriage, she could still see through his professional facade. Reynolds sighed, deciding honesty was the only appropriate choice. "He has my father's condition, Martha. Kennedy's disease. He didn't want you to know. Not with your own health battles." Martha closed her eyes briefly, absorbing this painful news. "How advanced?" "Early stages still, but progressing faster than the doctors initially predicted." A tear slipped down Martha's cheek. "My poor boy, always trying to be as strong as his father." "He's stronger," Reynolds admitted, carrying this burden while completing the mission. Never complained, never asked for special treatment. Martha squeezed his hand with surprising strength. "Go to him, Robert. He needs his father now. I don't want to leave you. I'm not going anywhere tonight, she assured him with a weak smile. The doctors say I'm stabilizing. Jimmy needs you more right now. Reynolds kissed her forehead gently. I won't be long. He found Jimmy in a private room on the neurology floor, connected to monitors and IV medication. Despite his condition, Jimmy struggled to sit up when Reynolds entered. At ease, specialist, Reynolds said, attempting humor to mask his concern. Jimmy relaxed, a faint smile crossing his features. How's Mom? Awake and stable, asking about you. Reynolds pulled a chair beside the bed. She knows, Jimmy, about your condition. Jimmy nodded slowly. Probably for the best. No more secrets. No more secrets, Reynolds agreed, and no more pushing yourself beyond limits. You could have told me you were struggling during the exercise. And risk the mission? Jimmy shook his head. That's not how you raised me, Dad. Not how you've lived your life. Reynolds felt the weight of his son's words. Had he inadvertently taught Jimmy that mission always came before personal well-being? Was that the legacy he wanted to leave? Maybe I haven't always set the right example, Reynolds admitted. There are times when you need to acknowledge limitations, when the mission isn't worth the personal sacrifice. Says the man who just completed a critical mission while his wife was fighting for her life in the hospital, Jimmy pointed out. Reynolds had no answer for that. His actions had always spoken louder than his words. The doctors say you'll recover from this episode, Reynolds said, changing the subject. But you'll need to accept a medical discharge from active duty. Jimmy nodded, having already accepted this reality. I figured as much. No more loading rounds for me. There are other ways to serve, Reynolds assured him. Your technical knowledge and experience are valuable. The Pentagon will find a role that accommodates your condition. Like you did, Jimmy asked? Finding a place for me on your crew despite knowing my diagnosis? That was different. I needed the best loader available, and that was you. Reynolds allowed a rare smile. And I wanted my son beside me for my final mission. They sat in companionable silence for a moment. The barriers between commander and subordinate, father and son, finally lowered. We won, didn't we? Jimmy finally asked. Proved humans still belong in the loop? We did, Reynolds confirmed. The Pentagon observers were convinced. Future systems will incorporate AI assistance but maintain human operators for critical decisions. Good. Jimmy seemed satisfied. It would have been a shame if my last mission didn't change anything. It changed everything, Reynolds assured him, both for the Army and for me. How so? Reynolds considered his answer carefully. It reminded me what truly matters. Not just completing the mission, but why we complete it, who we're protecting, what values we're upholding. The conversation was interrupted by a nurse entering to check Jimmy's vital signs. She administered medication through his IV, explaining it would likely make him drowsy. Get some rest, Reynolds told his son, standing to leave. I'll be between your room and your mother's, wherever I'm needed most. Dad? Jimmy called as Reynolds reached the door. I'm proud to be your son. Reynolds felt emotion well in his throat. And I've never been prouder to be your father. The next week passed in a blur of hospital rooms, medical consultations, and recovery milestones. Martha's condition gradually stabilized, the experimental treatment showing promising results despite its initial severe side effects. Jimmy's acute symptoms subsided, though the underlying progression of his condition remained a reality they all now acknowledge openly. General Harrison visited, bringing news of the Pentagon's official decision. Autonomous systems would be developed as supplements to human crews, not replacements. Reynolds' demonstration had proven conclusively that human judgment, creativity, and ethical reasoning remained irreplaceable in modern warfare. On the seventh day, as Martha sat up in bed for the first time reading reports from her doctors with her customary methodical attention, Reynolds received an unexpected call. Captain Reynolds, Harrison's voice came through the secure phone. I apologize for interrupting your family time, but there's something you need to know. What is it, Jim? Intelligence reports confirm the hostile nation has accelerated deployment of their autonomous tank program. Apparently, what they learned from the Raptor data was enough to finalize their design. Reynolds felt a chill. How reliable is this intelligence? Very. Satellite imagery shows at least a dozen units in field exercises. They're preparing for potential deployment. Reynolds processed this information with the strategic mind that had defined his career. And our countermeasures? That's why I'm calling, Harrison replied. The Pentagon wants to establish a new training division specifically focused on countering autonomous systems. They need someone with first-hand experience, someone who's proven they can defeat these systems. Reynolds immediately understood the implication. Jim, I'm retiring, I promised Martha. I know, Robert, and I wouldn't ask if it weren't critical. Harrison's voice grew earnest. This isn't combat deployment. It's a training position. Based stateside, regular hours, teaching the next generation of tank commanders how to counter the threat you've already defeated. Reynolds glanced at Martha, who was watching him with knowing eyes. She'd overheard enough to understand the nature of the call. Let me discuss it with my family, Reynolds finally said. I'll call you back. After ending the call, Reynolds explained the situation to Martha. He expected resistance, a reminder of his promise to retire completely. Instead, she surprised him. You should accept, she said simply. Martha, I promised you no more assignments. You promised no more combat deployments, she corrected gently. This is different. Teaching others what you know, preparing them for threats you've already faced. That's not breaking your promise, Robert. That's fulfilling your purpose. Reynolds considered her words. You're sure? I married a soldier, Robert, a man dedicated to service. Martha reached for his hand. I never expected you to stop being that man. I just needed you home more, present in our lives. This position allows both. Later that evening, Reynolds discussed the opportunity with Jimmy during their now regular evening visit. Mom's right, Jimmy said after hearing the details. You're not built for full retirement, Dad. You need purpose. And what about you? Reynolds asked. Your treatment will require regular medical supervision. Walter Reed is 20 minutes from the proposed training facility, Jimmy pointed out. And I've been offered a position as a technical advisor to the Abrams modernization program. Apparently, someone put in a good word about my performance during our little demonstration. Reynolds smiled, recognizing Harrison's influence. The general was taking care of both Reynolds' men, creating opportunities that accommodated their unique situations while valuing their contributions. The next morning, Reynolds called Harrison to accept the position. The training division would be established within 3 months, giving Martha time to complete her current treatment protocol and Jimmy to transition to his new role. 2 months later, Colonel Robert Thunder Reynolds stood at a podium in the Pentagon's Grand Ballroom, the newly authorized Medal of Honor gleaming on his chest. The audience consisted of military officials, defense contractors, and the entire crew of the Thunderbolt. In the front row sat Martha in a wheelchair, still recovering, but gaining strength daily. And beside her, Jimmy, using a cane but proudly wearing his Army uniform with new technical advisor insignia. The battle between human and machine has defined modern warfare, Reynolds began his acceptance speech. But what we demonstrated in Nevada wasn't that humans are superior to artificial intelligence, nor that AI is inherently flawed. What we proved is that the future lies in partnership. He gestured to the crew who had served with him on the Thunderbolt. These soldiers represent the best of human capability: judgment, creativity, ethical reasoning, adaptability. Qualities that no algorithm can fully replicate. Reynolds paused, making eye contact with the Pentagon officials responsible for future procurement decisions. The lesson is clear. We must embrace technological advancement without surrendering human responsibility. Our autonomous systems must augment human decision-making, not replace it, because in the chaos of combat, in the ethical complexities of modern warfare, there remains no substitute for the human heart, mind, and spirit. As applause filled the hall, Reynolds looked to Martha and Jimmy, the family that had sacrificed so much for his service. In their eyes, he saw not just pride in his accomplishments, but something far more valuable: forgiveness for his absences, understanding of his dedication, and love that had endured despite the demands of duty. In that moment, Colonel Robert Thunder Reynolds understood that his greatest legacy wasn't the battles he'd won or the doctrine he'd influenced, but the lives he'd touched and the values he'd upheld. The medal on his chest recognized his service to country, but the love of his family acknowledged his growth as a husband and father. As the ceremony concluded and well-wishers surrounded him, Reynolds kept his family in sight, never losing track of what truly mattered. He had fought and won the battle for humanity's place in modern warfare. Now he would dedicate himself to winning the equally important battle at home, being present for whatever time remained with the people he loved most. The thunder of tanks would always echo in his memory, but the quiet moments with Martha and Jimmy would define his future. It was time for the tank commander to become simply a husband and father, time for duty to give way to love. In the end, that was the most important victory of all.